Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. This webinar is brought to you by the New Hampshire Training Institute on Addictive Disorders. You can access the recording of this webinar on our website at www.nhadaca.org. After completing this webinar, please upload and complete the quiz if you are interested in receiving a certificate. You can find the quiz in the file pod throughout this presentation on our website at nhadaca.org, or you can email traininginstitute@nhadaca.org. You can email, mail, or fax the completed quiz. Contact information is on the quiz itself. If you are a member of NHADACA or NADAC, the certificate for this webinar is free. If you aren't a member, the fee is $15. You will receive a certificate worth 1 CE once you have completed and passed the quiz and paid for the webinar, if applicable within 21 days. Through the New Hampshire Training Institute on Addictive Disorders, this 1-hour event is pre-approved by the New Hampshire Board of Licensing for Alcohol and Other Drug Use Professionals, as well as NBCC. If you have any trouble viewing the webinar, audio problems, or have any technical questions, please contact us at 603-225-7060. Please email any questions regarding the material you see today at traininginstitute@nhadaca.org. You can upload these introduction slides in the file pod to the right of your screen. With that said, I will turn it over to our presenter, Kelly Ludke.
Hello everybody, I'm back for Core Function 7. And Core Function 7 is where we're going to talk about case management. So a little bit before we get into case management, about who I am, what I do, and where I come from. If you haven't watched any other of these core functions, my name is Kelly Ludke. I have my Master's in Education Counseling. I also have my CADS, which is a Certified Advanced Graduate Study in Counseling, and I'm licensed in the state of New Hampshire as a Master Licensed Alcohol and Drug Counselor. My job is Professor of Human Service and Addiction Counseling and Program Coordinator for the Addiction Counseling Program at NHTI, Concord's Community College here in Concord, New Hampshire. I put my work email down the last line here, kludke@ccsnh.edu, in case any of you want to reach out to me or if you have any questions, because as well as being the presenter for this core function, I'm also a program coordinator for the Addiction Counseling Program, professor. I'm also the past president for NHADACA, and currently serving as a board member for the licensing board for alcohol and other drug use professionals here in New Hampshire. So any questions you have, please feel free to contact me and I'll see what I can do to assist. So welcome to today's webinar on case management. So a little bit about this presentation is we're going to be talking about the core function number 7, so right after counseling, is case management. We're going to talk about what that means, where did it come from. We're going to talk about the ICNRC's definition and how it parallels to TAP 21 from SAMHSA. So we're going to be talking about the definition of the core function of case management according to the ICNRC. And I say we're going to talk about things according to the ICNRC because if some of you are taking this webinar because you're using it as CEs towards licensure, eventually you're going to have to take an exam for licensure, and that's the Alcohol and Drug Counselor's Examination through the ICNRC. When you take that exam, there might very well be some questions on definitions and global criteria of any of the core functions or all of the core functions. So you're going to want to know on an ICNRC exam what the ICNRC defines as the definition and global criteria of case management. So really important. Another objective is you're going to have some knowledge of the 2 global criteria of case management according to the ICNRC. And you're also going to know, as I mentioned before, where case management fits into the TAP 21 performance domains. So a little disclosure before we begin the content is that case management, as I just described to you, really only has these two global criteria, and it has a very brief definition. So to fill our time today, I'm going to try and give you as many real-life examples, examples from the classroom that I've encountered or worked with, and some of the assignments I often give my students to do when we're talking about case management in the classroom. So I teach, and teach at the college. I teach at two different colleges, and I teach the core functions to college students. So both of those courses I teach are in the core functions, and one's at the associate level and one's at the bachelor level. And I really always find it interesting, the different perspectives around case management. So I'm going to try and integrate both my experiences teaching associate level students and teaching bachelor level students in the core function. So the IC and RC, they're back, and the IC and RC defines case management as activities which bring services, agencies, resources, and or people together within a planned framework of action toward the achievement of established goals. It may involve liaison activities and collateral contacts. So what does that mean? I think if I asked people, what does a case manager do, right? And besides the obvious response of case managers do case management, right? A case manager, a lot of you would say, helps or does referrals. I think a lot of you would say, well, a case manager sits down with the client and determines that the client needs mental health care, they need legal care, and they need employment services. And so the case manager just refers you to a mental health clinician, refers you to perhaps an attorney, parole, probation officer, or refers you to New Hampshire Voc Rehab. And that's not quite 100% true. That's like one very small aspect. But I think the word that the referral is not always correct, because it's so much more than making a referral. To me, a referral means that the case manager says, you need mental health services? Okay, here's a card for the community mental health agency down the road. You go see them and tell them you need some mental health services. That's a really poor referral, but that's not what case management is. Case management is sort of following up with those activities. It's bringing together those services, agencies, and resources so that clients can get what they need met, right? So it isn't just shooing them out the door and telling them where they can get what they need. It's, really going that extra mile to make sure that the process is seamless. So I'm going to talk about that process of seamlessness. And you're probably going to be really sick of hearing that word by the time I'm done, but it really deserves great attention, because I'm going to give you some examples of situations, and hopefully you'll see why seamlessness is so important in a referral. Let's go on to the purpose of case management. It's a good spot for this. So, the purpose. The first purpose is to ensure that the client receives all the services necessary to address his or her treatment needs. So I just gave you an example of a client who needs employment, legal, and mental health services. Typically, what happens is a client, well, I shouldn't say typically, because a lot of agencies today, the counselor is the case manager. So you really need to be aware of that. Don't always assume that you're going to have this separate person doing this separate core function. In fact, assume that you as the counselor are going to do every single one of these core functions along the way. You know, other agencies might be in a position where they have an individual case manager. I mean, that's great, but it's not always realistic. It's super great if an agency has the resources to have a separate identified case manager, and some larger agencies are able to do that, but not always. So don't make that assumption that, oh, this is going to be a case management issue and I'm just going to kind of push it on somebody else. That's not how this would work. And even if you do have a separate person doing the case management, it's not now no longer your responsibility. Right? You need to be following up with these services that your client, that person's still your client. You still need to follow up with, how is that mental health referral going? How are they working along with that counselor? Did they get that assessment? What were the results of that assessment? How does that impact our work with your substance use disorder? Right? Did you get connected with an attorney, or did you get an opportunity to go see your probation and parole officer, and how did that go? How was your urine drug screen analysis? Was it positive? Was it negative? How does that impact our work in counseling for your substance use disorder? Job, right? Were you able to go over to voc rehab? What was the outcome? Are they going to require urine drug screen analysis? Did you need any assistance with the resume? And, you know, so you're always constantly asking questions about the places your clients are going outside of your services to receive additional services. I hope that just made sense what I said. But if you can't provide everything that the client needs and they need to go outside of your agency, you still need to be connected. Right? You still need to be asking about how it's going and how it relates, how it ties back, how it connects with the work you're doing with your client. The second purpose of case management is involving coordination of individuals and services to assist the client in the achievement of goals outlined in the treatment plan. So just because you are not necessarily, let's use, for example, the mental health piece, right? You've recognized some symptoms of depression. You have made a note that your client should certainly be assessed for mental health concerns. You think that there might be some depression there, and you think that they need to go to the local community mental health center and receive an assessment, and then probably get connected to a clinician there, if applicable. You are, at this point, the coordinator of making sure that your client knows who they're going to go see, what they're going to ask for when they get there, what they're expected to talk about and examine, right? And so in this case, it might be those symptoms of depression that the client shared with you. They're going to want to share with someone who's an expert in mental health. And you're going to make sure that the client, knows how to make an appointment, has the ability to get there, right? You certainly don't want to make an appointment for a client who doesn't drive and the mental health center is 50 miles away. But that's unrealistic. That sets that client up for failure. So you want to be looking at, okay, what might be in a walking distance? What might be on a bus route? Does this client have the ability to have transportation vouchers so that they can go to these appointments? So you really have to start examining and coordinating how this person is going to get what they need. And hopefully once they get what they need, it starts to work on achieving the goals outlined in the treatment plan. So just because you're not necessarily treating the depression or the mental health piece, it certainly should be an aspect of your treatment plan, right? You've recognized something, you've made some coordinations for the individual to get assistance with that, and you're going to keep checking in to make sure that that client is following through with it and that it's helping and it's working and it's leading to the, hopefully, the achievement of a goal. And then 3 is this seamless, individualized treatment. And I talk a lot about this also in treatment planning, but case management, I'm going to correct the word should here on the PowerPoint and say it must be. It must be a seamless, individualized treatment. You have to look at the person as an individual. You have to look at what their resources are, what their diagnosis is, what barriers might be in the way, what are the strengths of this person, and that's where it becomes individualized, right? A cookie cutter case management plan is not going to work, right? It really won't work for a lot of people. It won't work for everyone, but it certainly won't work for a lot of people because each person is going to bring a unique situation. And a really simple example of that is, again, back to the transportation. You're going to have one client who might need mental health treatment for depression, and they prefer to see somebody that is 50 miles away because they don't want anybody in town seeing them. They're a high-profile person. They have the means and the money and the transportation to get to that place 50 miles away. That's going to look very different from the person who has no transportation issues, perhaps isn't a high-profile person, perhaps needs something on a bus route or within walking distance, right? So you have to look at the person, what their needs are, what they're comfortable with, what their barriers might be, and what their strengths might be. And the seamless process is paramount. And by seamless, it means you're trying to, the best way I can describe it is when something is seamless, you've smoothed out the wrinkles, right? So I always think about this piece of fabric. And when it has these deep wrinkles in it, right, it's been sitting in your laundry basket all curled up in a ball, and you pull it and you stretch it out, and it has these deep grooves in it. And those grooves to me often represent barriers. They represent disconnection. And when you ask somebody to do something and the plan or the course of action has all these deep grooves in it, the likelihood that person is successful in achieving that plan, that course of action, is slim to none. Because the chances are the time that they hit that first deep groove, that first barrier, they're going to say, it's too hard, this is too difficult, there's too many things in my way, this isn't meant to be, I can't manage all this, so I'm a failure, I can't do this, once again, I stink at life. And they start that negative self-talk and they start sort of spiraling downwards. You've really set a person up to fail. And it could be avoided. It is preventable. And it's preventable by taking that fabric and ironing out all those deep wrinkles. And you do that by really, that's how you make it seamless, right? You can't, it's just smooth sailing. It's a smooth piece of silk. There's no barriers really, or there's very small barriers. And if there are any barriers, you've worked through possible resolutions to those barriers with the client. So you've role played, right? I can't tell you how many times I've done a role play with a client just over what they're going to say when they call the mental health facility. And we pretend, we use our fingers like phones, and I say, hi, Mental Health Treatment Center, how may I help you? Or how may I direct your call? That client knows by the time they leave my office that they're asking for an assessment. They're asking for an appointment to be assessed for potential depression or other mental health issues. They know approximately how long it's going to take. They know approximately what questions are going to be asked of them on the phone with the mental health provider. They know about what time frame it's going to take to get this appointment met. They're going to have insurance cards ready. They're going to have address and phone numbers and all kinds of information ready so that when the person on the phone asks them things, they're not shuffling through their pocketbooks or shuffling through pants pockets to find information. So I recommend that to people. I say before anybody calls anybody, do a role play, right? Tell the client, this is how it's going to go down. Let's practice it so that when the time comes and you have to pick up the phone to make the actual call, you're ready to rock and roll, you feel comfortable, and you've now set up your client for success. You've set them up by being able to work, to sort of anticipate any barriers that might come up and be prepared for them. And I also help them work through, what if they do ask you something that you don't know, you're taken off guard, you're not sure how to answer, what might be some responses you could give? What might be some actions you could take? So that when it comes, they're ready and they're prepared. And the more prepared and ready your client is to do the action of, let's say, for example, calling this mental health treatment center, the more successful they're likely to be. And you also might need to take a look at, what happens after you make the appointment, right? What do they bring with them to the appointment? What do they say to the person who's going to interview them? How much time should they allot? How will they have enough money to take the bus to and from? What if they have a work commitment? How will they make it from your office to the mental health agency to work? Not back to home. Like, what does that bus route look like? What train lines are they going to take? So, you're trying to think of everything to set this client up to be successful. And it's right down to making the call, to going to the appointment, to being productive in the appointment, to coming back and letting you know how everything went. So when I talk about seamless, it isn't just this silly little, tell them that they got to call the mental health agency and give them the phone number and let them use your phone. It goes way, way beyond that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do those things, but there's much, much more to consider and look at. And that's where the seamlessness and the individualization of case management comes into play. I hope I've exhausted seamlessness for you to understand the importance of it. So as I mentioned before, there's 2 global criteria for case management, so not a big hefty one. I just thought of something I wanted to talk about too, so I'm going to back up for just a second. And another part of the seamlessness, another part of that individualized treatment is buy-in. So I think before you even talk about, hey, I think there might be some depression here, there might be some mental health concerns, you should see a mental health provider, you have to explain to the client why you're asking them to do what you're asking them to do. It's called buy-in. If I talk with you and I'm noticing some symptoms of depression and I'm concerned and think, a mental health evaluation would be appropriate, and then I don't say anything though, I just kind of keep that as a mental note, and then at the end of our session I say, great talking with you, John, we'll see you next week. In the meantime, I think you should go see a mental health professional, and let me know how it goes when you get back. What would run through your mind? I know what would run through my mind is, what? What do you mean a mental health professional? Why do I need a mental health professional? Oh my God, what did I say that triggered this person to think I'm crazy? Right? And we have to remember that obviously if someone has a mental health concern, it does not mean they're crazy, right? It means there's something going on that you're not competent to treat. So you need somebody else to do it. But our clients are not going to be savvy like that. Not all the time. They're going to go to what the stigma is, which means if you see a mental health professional, you must be crazy. You must have some serious diagnosis that's chronic, never going to go away, and they start to escalate into panic mode. And that's the last thing you want to have happen, right? You don't want your client going to this place of, oh my God, I have some incurable mental health problem. You know, my mom always said I was crazy, and she's right. You know, I mean, you have people de-escalating for perhaps no reason. So you really need to approach your client and give yourself some time to talk about, hey, John, you know, as we were talking, you were mentioning things like not being able to eat, not being able to sleep, feeling hopeless, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, I'm wondering if, to me, these could be signs and symptoms of depression. Do you feel like you might have some depression, right? And they might say, like, you know, now that you mention it, you're putting it all together. Yeah, you know, it does feel like that. And you say, I think it might be in your best interest because I cannot, by my license, treat mental health, to just do an evaluation and just assess and see what's happening with that and see if that's something that we can look at treating with a mental health provider. You know, explaining in a way that's not threatening and it's not scary, except just, you know, this is a common thing I see with people who have alcohol use disorders that are severe. It's very common for people once they begin early recovery to have anxiety or to have depression. And you mentioned some of those symptoms, so I just want to see, you know, I want to have you checked out by someone who's a professional in that arena and, you know, make sure that you're covered there. Just like when you go and see your general, you know, primary care physician. They do a general checkup and they might say, oh, you know, there's something weird going on in your ear. You know, we might want to send you to an ear, nose, throat specialist just to check it out and make sure it's nothing, right? And most of us would be like, yeah, sure. You know, we take the referral and we get it checked out because we're concerned. We don't want anything to happen to our ears. So same thing here, right? You just got to sort of be calm about it and approach it in a way that helps your client understand why you're making the referral, and also helping your client, like, not jump off the deep end with your concerns. You know, don't set it up like, I think you have clinical depression, right? You're completely outside your scope of competency once you start saying things like that. But you can also really send people into an unnecessary tizzy, right? They might start to get really worried about that and think it's chronic and for life and really get worked up over something that may be completely treatable and not long-term. So that's part of the buy-in process. You've got to try and help your client understand why you're making the referral, because if they don't understand why they need to go, they're not going to go. Why would anybody go to something if they don't agree or see what you're talking about, or they don't understand the importance of getting it checked out? So you have to be prepared to discuss and educate, really, why this might be important. If you let depressive symptoms go untreated, perhaps, you know, your sobriety could be in jeopardy, right? You might start drinking again to relieve some of the sadness and hopelessness that you're feeling. So you certainly want to be able to talk about the implications of not treating something that could potentially be there, and that helps with the buy-in too, right? So buy-in, seamlessness, and individualized. Those are your three key takeaway terms for those past slides. So now back onto global criteria for case management. The first one is coordinate services for client care. That seems pretty simplistic, doesn't it? But this is where you start to talk about knowing how to explain and describe how client services are coordinated, and then actually doing the coordination, or if you're lucky enough, the case manager does the coordination. But competency is generally being able to understand and implement the who, what, when, where, and why questions, right? So Who does the counselor coordinate with? What needs to be coordinated? When is this coordination completed? Where is the coordination completed? And why is there a need for the coordination of services? So counselors need to be able to answer each of these questions individually, right? So for each person on their caseload, if somebody asks you the who, what, when, where, or why about coordination of services, you need to be able to answer that, right? So that means genuinely really knowing your clients, right? And what you're asking them to do or what you're connecting them to. The next one is explain the, all right, so we talked a lot about this one, but explain the rationale of case management activities to the client. You have to state that rationale, answer any client questions, and remember, you got to be honest. So if we're going to go back to the mental health example. If you're talking about buy-in at this point, and you're saying, I really think you could benefit from it, an implication could be your recovery. So we want to make sure we look at it so it doesn't escalate or get worse. And the client asks you a question like, do you think I'm clinically depressed, or do you think I'm depressed? You can't answer that question because you're not a mental health professional. So you say that, right? To be honest with you, John, I can't answer that question because I'm not a trained mental health professional, but I am trained to recognize symptoms of depression, and you've given me this list of symptoms. They fit the criteria, right? They appear to be symptoms of depression, and that's why I want to get it checked out by an expert in the profession, in the mental health profession. I want to make sure we can rule it out. Perhaps I'm wrong, but only an expert, somebody who's competently trained in the mental health profession, can do that. So you don't want to give it this, really flippant answer like, well, I can't tell you that, right? You really want to go into why you can't tell them that, or why you won't be able to answer that, and, make sure you're always acting within your scope of competency. So even if you thought, yeah, I do think you're depressed, you really can't say that because that's outside your scope of competency. That would be unethical to potentially give someone a diagnosis when you're not trained to do that. Determining client's needs. So whatever the client needs, again, should be a collaboration between you and the client. What you may necessarily think is a primary important case management service, the client may not be ready for that. They may not want to do that. They may still have hesitation and lack of motivation around that. So what do? You push it down their throat? Of course not. We all know this. Just think of an experience in your own life when someone's told you, I think you should quit smoking, but you're not ready to quit smoking, right? In your mind, you're thinking, mind your own business. I'll do what I want to do. Don't push your stuff on me. This is my life, right? We get defensive. And why would clients be any different? So if they're not willing to look at it at that point, you don't make that case management referral right then and there. You have to go back a few steps, meet them where they're at, perhaps do some motivational interviewing around why you think it's important, and you try and get that buy-in. But you can't just say, well, I don't really care if you're ready to do it. You have to do it because I know smoking's bad for you. So get down to that nicotine replacement patch in store and buy some, you can't do that, right? So you really there needs to be an effort and a conversation, right? An individualized collaborative effort between you and the client when you're determining their needs. You also need to determine what resources are needed to meet these needs. What are the resources in your community? I see this all too often. a counselor's like, okay, yeah, you really need like a voc rehab because that's what they used at their last job. But there isn't a voc rehab in their area. So why in the world would you recommend a voc rehab if there isn't one in the community that the client lives in or has access to? So you'd have to look at, if there's no voc rehab, what are some other potential places where clients could get assistance with their resume or temp jobs or job placement or like career counseling, what jobs would be good for them. So that's why it's so important for you to know about community resources. Wherever you work, surrounding towns, it's good to know if you can what's even going on throughout your state. If you live in a small state like New Hampshire, sometimes you're able to connect people to towns nearby that have resources, and clients can access them fairly easily because we're a small state, right? You can travel one side of the state to the other in a couple hours. But then you take a look at a state like Missouri, and it'll take you 10, 15 hours to get from one side of the state to the other. So that's not doable. So know, where you're working, where your agency is, where you're seeing clients, what are the community resources there, what might be some of the community resources nearby. Always stay involved and active about new things coming up too. And I think businesses are good at, trying to get the word out there and get to agencies, but, look in the internet. Nowadays you have internet, right? When I first started counseling, we didn't have internet. We had to use the phone book, right? Or we had to talk to people. We had to drive around our community and find out what was going on. We had to talk to people. And that honestly made it really hard, but we developed good relationships with people that way too. Today we have the internet. You don't have to necessarily talk as much to people to find out about their services because it's usually on a web page. But I think both are great ways to find out about your resources. Internet's obviously a lot faster, but then I think it's always worth a call to the agency and say, hey, I do some substance use work over at this agency, and I might have clients that would be interested in your services. So how would that look? How would a client make an appointment with you? What's the process? Because you want to know what that process is for when you go to make it a seamless transition to your client. You want to know, hey, client, this is how this goes down. So when you call, expect X, Y, Z. Because you've already called the agency. You know how things are going to go down. So I would definitely say find out what's going on in your town and surrounding small towns if applicable. Use the internet certainly to give yourself an understanding, some education around what's available. But then take it just one step further and make that call. Reach out to them. Introduce yourself, introduce the agency, and find out what would that process look like. What's the time frame? Do you have a wait list right now? What would be the best way for a client, to receive expedient services? How does this look? And people will be happy to generally help you with that. And the last part in determining clients' needs is how do these needs fit into the treatment plan? So don't forget about that treatment plan, right? You got to document what you're doing to address what you're finding in your counseling sessions or your group sessions. What was uncovered, and then what are you doing about it? So you're making sure that it's in the treatment plan, and what's the course of action, right? What's the plan? What are you going to do to address the depressive symptoms that the client disclosed in treatment today? So when you're looking at determining what the client needs, how does that look in your treatment plan? And there's TAP 21 again. So just as a sort of a review, is TAP 21 is a publication put out by SAMHSA. And SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. And they put out a publication called TAP 21. And tab 21 certainly includes the core function of case management under domain 4, which is called service coordination. And under tab 21, the 3 elements under service coordination is 1, implementing the treatment plan, 2, consulting, and 3, continuing the assessment and treatment plan. That's pretty broad and general. I really like the ICNRC's global criteria a little bit better. But tab 21 is certainly a parallel resource in identifying service coordination. Oh, a discussion question. This is actually a true or false. So I'll give you a minute to think about this, but the question is, the ICNRC defines case management as activities which bring services, agencies, resources, and people together within a planned framework of action toward the achievement of established goals. So go ahead, take a second, think about whether that definition aligns with what the ICNRC says. I'll have a drink of water while you're all thinking. Okay, hopefully you all got this one right. It is, oh, I didn't put the answer in there. Okay, the answer is true, right? The ICNRC, if you remember, I don't know, back slide maybe 2 or 3, the ICNRC defines case management as activities intended to bring services, agencies, resources, or people together within a planned framework of action toward the achievement of established goals. It may also involve liaison activities and collateral contacts. So the answer is true. And I know you all got that right. Tab 21's definition of service coordination, which remember, service coordination is, in SAMHSA's eyes, is fairly synonymous with ICNRC's case management. And service coordination definition is lengthy, but I think you'll see one part I sort of highlighted. It's a little hard to see. I want to talk about that. But the administrative, clinical, and evaluative activities that bring the client, treatment services, that's you, and others, but that's partly you, community agencies, and other resources together to focus on issues and needs identified in the treatment plan. So if we go back to our little case example, I don't know if I labeled our clients or not, but let's call him Joe or John, right? We'll call him Joe. So Joe has expressed some depressive symptoms, right? It says he's feeling sad all the time, he's feeling helpless, hopeless, he's crying more than usual, he can't eat, he can't sleep. So you're putting that all together and thinking, that might be depression. So those needs get identified in the treatment plan. So you don't have to be necessarily treating the depression to include that you've made a referral to a mental health provider for the symptoms of depression. So that's what they're talking about there. So in your treatment plan, you know, the goal might be for the client to seek out an evaluation or an assessment from a mental health provider. And then under your, so the problem would be the symptoms that the client listed. And then they have the goal of getting the assessment or evaluation from a mental health provider. And the objectives would be those baby steps we talked about. What exactly the client needs to do to reach that goal, right? So perhaps number 1 is simply making the phone call to set up the appointment. You know, number 2 might be scheduling the assessment with the mental health provider. 3, you know, attending the appointment, right? So really small baby steps so that the client can literally look at the plan and know exactly what they need to do. So back to the definition. Service coordination which includes case management and client advocacy. So I have to stop. I'm putting up my big stop sign here and talking briefly, because I think I'm running out of time again, about client advocacy. I have to say, as a counselor, I don't even think, it might be in this PowerPoint, but if it's not, I got to say it here. And if it isn't here and I'm saying it again, I'm still not sorry, because I think it deserves great attention and repetitive attention. And that is, not only are you a client's counselor, right? You're their mentor. You're their guide. You're their cheerleader. You're their educator. And almost as important, you are their advocator. So it is part of your job to advocate for the client's success. And that means doing whatever you can within your professional realm to make sure that your client is successful in reaching their goals that they've established with you. So client advocacy, I think we get so, I think that gets lost. And I really like how TAP 21 brings it up. And ICNRC doesn't even mention it in their definition. So that's why I think it's always so important to look at both the ICNRC and SAMHSA's TAP 21, because client advocacy is so important. And I guess an example would be what we talked about earlier, is when you go through the process of role playing what calling the mental health agency would look like, what the client would say, right? And then helping when they're like, oh, I just don't think I can do this, you know. Sure, you could do this, right? Maybe we could even write out a script for you. You can use my telephone to make this phone call. I'll stay here and be supportive of you. I'll play the nice CD music that you like in the background to help keep you calm, right? It's advocating for them. Also, advocacy means if you have a release of information and you're discussing your client's care with the mental health provider, and perhaps the mental health provider is just not understanding how mental health and addiction can work together, or you know, is sort of perhaps stigmatizing the client's addiction, and that would be your opportunity to really educate the mental health provider around addiction, advocate for what your client's needs are, support your client in continuing to get the care that they need, right? Because sometimes our clients can't say eloquently what they need, or they don't have the information or education, or they feel there's a incongruency between professional and client, so that they feel they're being disrespectful if they speak back to the professional treating them and say, you know, I don't like the way you're treating me, or I think that that's disrespectful, that's stigmatizing to me, or discrimination towards me. So it would be our role to really make sure that we step in and we act as sort of a mediator to advocate for our client's best interest. Okay, now back to the definition. Includes case management, client advocacy, and it establishes a framework of action to enable the client to achieve specific goals. That sounds very much like ICNRC. It involves collaboration with the client, significant others, coordination of treatment and referral services, liaison activities with community resources, and managed care systems, client advocacy, and ongoing evaluation of treatment progress and client needs. So this TAP 21 definition is really inclusive. It does bring in some of the aspects of the ICNRC definition, but I feel like it does go a little deeper into the definition of case management or service coordination. Oh. So I think I just found our answer. It's right here. True. See slide number 3. So that's just in the wrong spot. Don't worry about that. All right. TAP 21, Domain 4, Service Coordination continued. It also, Domain 4 speaks about identifying and maintaining information about current community resources in order to meet identified client needs. So we just talked about this. This is the going out into your community and learning what's available, what resources are there, introducing yourself to resources in the community, what you do, where you work, what kind of clients you see, what services might be available for some of your clients. It's going on the internet and doing a little bit more of a global search, right, other than just checking out what's in your neighborhood. So really making sure you're out there and identifying. I often have my college students do a little project around making a community resource book. So I get them to get a little 3-ring binder, and then they have to research what services are available for their clientele within 25 miles. Right, and we use the college as like a home base and say, well, what's available for services for people with addiction concerns within 25 miles of the college. And so they have to go out there and find what those resources are, and they usually end up, printing information about vocational rehab services or employment services, mental health agencies, and they'll print out, the agency's webpage or something like that, so they have phone numbers and all that. And that's a good beginning framework to start with, just having it in a 3-ring binder so you can easily access it. But don't forget to make those relationships. I really need to stress the importance of that. And I really love this. Advocate for the client in areas of identified needs to facilitate continuity of care. Tab 21 also goes on to say, evaluate the effectiveness of case management activities through collaboration with the client. Ask them what's going on. How's it working for them? Are they making any progress? Are they feeling any better? Do they like, their clinician? How are things going in general? Right? Also talk to treatment team members, community resources to ensure that your clients get in quality service coordination. So remember, it's not just making this referral and then being like, okay, I'm done with you on that. I'm only going to talk about your alcohol use disorder. No, it's what's happening with all the things that you talked about, those depressive symptoms you talked about, or your unemployment issues or your legal issues. Consult with the client, family, and concerned others to make appropriate changes to the treatment plan, ensuring progress toward treatment goals. So as you learn more things, you need to be updating that treatment plan. If things aren't working, go back to that treatment plan and change it. If things are working, go back to that treatment plan and update it, right? Make sure everybody's on the same page about any progress or lack of progress happening in those treatment goals. Make sure you prepare accurate, concise screening, intake, and assessment documents. So eventually we'll talk about the core function of report and record keeping and how to actually properly prepare accurate and concise documents when it comes to clinical work. But you got to make sure you're keeping good notes, right? You got to make sure you're updated on the screening, intake, and assessment documents as well. So case management, the function of case management is administrative support of the client's therapeutic goals. That's pretty forward and straight and simple. Case management is the coordination of activities and services for a client in order to facilitate the positive outcome of the treatment plan. So if things aren't working, it doesn't mean you just give up. You find another alternative source to make sure you're still working towards that positive outcome. Coordination implies the involvement of more than one person in making sure that plans are carried out successfully. I think we've talked about that extensively. In managing the case of a client, a counselor may use consultation and referral functions. Case management is more than either of those functions individually, though. So to describe consultation or referral as case management is mistaken, and I mentioned that earlier on in this webinar. It's just not saying, okay, you need mental health services, here's your card, go make that call. Case management is really much more comprehensive, and it's about coordination. Remember, that's where that seamless piece comes in all aspects of the treatment plan. So even if you're not competent to treat mental health, you're still responsible for making sure the client receives the care that they need around their mental health concern. So case management does not exist in a vacuum at all. It's really getting outside of that vacuum and making sure you're talking in the community with other agencies, obviously respecting confidentiality. Case management activities begin with the initial treatment plan, and they continue all the way through treatment to discharge and any transitional care that you might be recommending or referring to after treatment. So things like perhaps transitional living, aftercare programs, or continued care programs. We've talked about this already, but so in some agencies, you're going to have the luxury of a separate person who does case management. That's really, in my experience, not often the case. More or less, that person is going to be you, the counselor. But a case manager does not need to be a counselor in order to conduct the core function of case management, so that's important. While a person with good administrative or management skills can competently coordinate services, in most agencies, each client's individual counselor provides case management, straight from John Herdman's book. And that has really been my own professional experience. We've talked about this. This piece right here is that buy-in, right? Making sure you have releases of information in place so that you're able to speak with the other agency that's providing some of the case management. So whether that's the mental health provider, the employment agency, probation parole officers, but also being able to explain what's happening to the client and orient the client to the program, right? I think we've talked about that quite a bit. So the definition of an interdisciplinary team becomes important too, because a lot of the times you might be making referrals and there might be some case management with people inside your agency, but people that do very different jobs. So an interdisciplinary team is usually made up of a physician, could be a psychiatrist, registered nurse, program manager, program director, clinical supervisor, mental health professionals, social workers, substance abuse counselors, or family therapists. So just important, those are just some roles and some titles of people that you're often going to work with in case management services. Just so you're familiar, I think, with the terminology of it. And here is what I wasn't sure was on your slide, and is the different hats a counselor wears. And there it is, educator and advocator, right? So a counselor wears many hats. They're a counselor, a case management, an educator, a liaison, an advocate, and cheerleader and mentor and many other things. That's just a small representation. Case management services are determined through the assessment of the 6 dimensions, right, from ACEP. Let's see. So case management in action, like the other core functions we've learned about, case management builds on the foundation of the core functions before it. So it builds on counseling, it builds on treatment planning, it builds on screening, intake, orientation, assessment, all of them. Taking the goals and objectives from the treatment plan, case management is specific tasks that the counselor or case manager engages in to assist the client in meeting their goals. And we have definitely talked about that. Time for another discussion question. True or false, a counselor or case manager doesn't need to know all resources available in the community. That's what the internet is for. False, right? So head back on up a few slides. So we talked extensively about the fact that it's very important to identify and maintain information about current community resources, and also not just rely on the internet, make those calls, reach out to people, and see exactly how the process would go. So case management examples, I think we've talked a lot about this, but you know, like the example we've been talking about all day, or for the past hour, excuse me, is like mental health, right? So he needs a primary care physician who could give a physical or talk about medically assisted treatment, right? So that they're knowledgeable about addiction. And following up on those referrals, was your client able to connect with them? What were the barriers? Did any other referrals come out of that referral? And making sure proper releases of information are signed so that you can all communicate with one another. So in summary, case management takes on many forms. It's individualized, right? It's seamless. It's an opportunity for the counselor to advocate for the diverse needs of his or her client. The process in which a counselor assists their client in reestablishing their awareness of internal strengths and building upon those to meet treatment goals. And it's coordinating, monitoring, evaluating a multitude of services to meet the specific and complex needs of clients. Here's my list of references. Please check these out. And that concludes the end of today's webinar on core function case management. I appreciate all your attention today and look forward to the next core function with you.